everyone and welcome to my channel. Today I want to film a video about the 2024 releases that I have read last year. Now I bought myself an early birthday present and it is a microphone. So I'm still experimenting with it. We'll see how it goes. I hope it goes well. This is the first sit down video I'm trying to film with it. So yeah, I'm still trying it out and everything. Now, I have read quite a few 2024 releases, so I thought this would maybe be a good kind of wrap-up thing to do at the beginning of 2025. And if you are participating in the Magical Readathon, maybe you saw the recent announcement video for the Year of LDA, which is a year-long readathon thingy that you can do as kind of like an add-on to the usual Magical Readathon. And the prompt for January as a starting point for this kind of choose your own adventure readathon thing is to read a 2024 release. So I think this could be a helpful video if you're not quite sure what to pick up maybe. So I tried to sort these books into genres. We will start out with fantasy and fantasy romance, then we'll do horror and thriller, and last but not least I have a bit of an odd category and that is holiday books. So yeah, I hope this is an interesting setup. Let's just talk about the books. So the first book I wanted to talk about is Sunbringer by Hannah Kaner. This is book 2 in this series following God Killer. In the series we follow mainly a God Killer called Kissin. At the beginning of the first book, her family is horribly murdered by the believers of a certain god, and so as she grows up, she decides to become a god killer. There has been a terrible war in this world, so gods are now forbidden, and Kissin is just traveling the lands trying to find gods that have sprung up to get rid of them before they get too powerful. And then she meets a young girl who has a god attached to her, and that is very unusual. Usually gods are attached to objects like altars, and so she isn't really sure what to do with this girl, and that slowly gets into a bigger plot with the whole world being at stake. The second book hasn't gotten the best reviews, but I don't really see why that is. I think that while this has this thing where we have a group of characters that work really well together in the first book and they get separated in the second book, obviously that is a little bit sad, but at the same time, I could absolutely see that these characters had to go on a bit of their own journey to reach where they have to be for the final book that hopefully comes out this year. So I really enjoyed the second book. I gave it 4 stars. I think that what I found really impressive with the series so far is how much character development Hannah Kaner can get into quite short fantasy books. And I very much enjoyed that because I read for the characters. Next, I wanted to mention The Familiar by Leigh Bardugo. This is a standalone book that is completely not related to the Grishaverse or anything like that. This is a historical fantasy that is set, I think, in the 1600s, 1500s in Spain. This is a time where Jews were persecuted and there was the Inquisition of the Catholic Church, and we follow a girl called Lucia, and she has kind of a magical power that she's kind of hiding, but it is discovered by her mistress, and that gets her involved in a kind of competition that is very dangerous, because if she wins this competition, she could become very powerful and serve the king, but if she doesn't win, it could mean that she ends up just being declared a witch. And yeah, I really enjoyed this book. This has this trope where a kind of eternal being is falling in love with a mortal girl. So if you enjoy that, this might be interesting. I just really liked the vibe of this book. I wouldn't say that the plot is very intriguing or impressive, but somehow this book kind of got me in the end, and when it ended I just cared way more than I thought I did. So yeah, I would still recommend it, even though I can totally see why some people did not like this one. I feel like the next one is also a bit controversial, and that is How to Become the Dark Lord and Die Trying by Django Wexler. This is the first book in a duology, and this is a kind of like a satire fantasy where we have our main character who got spawned into a magical world. There was this like old wizard and told her she's the one to save the people of this world, and so she goes on this quest and she fails and she gets respawned, and that happens over and over and over again. She simply cannot defeat the Dark Lord. She has tried so many timelines and has never succeeded, and now when we start following her, she decides to not give a fuck anymore and to become the Dark Lord instead. So this one has quite a bit of a dark humor to it. At the beginning of the book, our main character doesn't really think that her actions have any consequences, so she just goes around killing people, but that gets like harder and harder for her as the story progresses, as she lives for longer and starts thinking about like, hey, maybe this does have consequences for these people. And then also this has a lot of like sexual humor, I would say. So this is like very hit or miss. The main character in this is like the horniest bisexual you can ever imagine. And when I read this book in the vlog, I said that, you know, horny people need some representation too. But I can totally see why it feels a bit weird reading about a very horny woman written by a man. For me personally, I could just set some of these things aside and just go with the flow with that one. But if you're sensitive to this kind of like bad humor, then you probably won't like this book. But I'm planning to read the sequel this year and finish this duology off. Then we have The Dead Cat Tail Assassins by P. Djèlí Clark. This is one of my favorite authors. I love his novellas so much, and I'm still trying to read all of his backlist as well. But this was the new release in 2024, and I must say, from the title and the description of the book, my hopes were so high. And ultimately, I don't think that this book could quite reach what I was hoping for with this one. But basically, we follow a woman who has sold her dead body kind of to a goddess. So basically, when she was alive, she made a contract with a goddess that when she dies, she will serve this goddess as an assassin for 10 years. So basically, our main character isn't alive, but she also isn't really dead. The thing with these contracts is that as soon as you die and the contract starts, you do not remember anything about your previous life. You don't know why you signed up to do it or anything like that. You can't remember people from your life, and you just have to do the jobs that you're given, and those are assassin jobs. And so when we start following the story, our main character is given a job to assassinate someone, but when she gets there, she recognizes this person, and that is not possible because she cannot remember anything from her previous life. And so she decides not to kill that person, but to figure out what the hell is going on, and that leads to a couple of hours of like very wild like fighting. For me personally, a lot of this felt too much like a video game. I think as a like more visual format, this would have worked better. And I feel like this was just like our main character kind of battling other dead cat tail assassins with like different quirks and different powers, and it just kept kind of repeating itself in that regard, and I just was hoping for something else, I guess. But overall, I did really like what the story tried to explore with like timelines and kind of like alternate universes and stuff like that. And then also this whole idea of, you just never know what you will decide to do in the future, and you also sometimes can't really understand anymore which decisions you made in the past. So yeah, it was quite interesting, but it wasn't like the 5-star read that I wanted. The next book, however, absolutely exceeded all of my expectations, and that was Someone You Can Build a Nest In by John Wiswell. This is a cozy horror fantasy. And that sounds so strange, but it really is like the best combination. In this one, we follow a monster, and this monster kind of lives in this old ruin, and she's hibernating. So she is just like lying in her cave, minding her own business. Actually, she's in like kind of like a pool, like a well kind of thing. And then people enter her lair. And she gets woken up by that, and she has to get rid of these people because they're intruding into her home. And when she does that, she realizes there is this very big plot against her, and she needs to like stop her hibernation early and try to fight off this plot. And this was so funny. The main character is a shapeshifter, so she can basically look like anything, which I really love. I love shapeshifters. It's just something that, like, I don't know, if it's in a book, I usually really enjoy it. So yeah, we have that. It is like, it has this like very cozy humor, and we also have a bit of a romance in this because our main character gets hurt very badly while trying to fight off this plot, and so she meets a girl in the woods who is helping her to heal, and they develop like romantic feelings for each other. Both of these characters are more like on the asexual, demisexual spectrum, I would say. They don't use these terms, I think, but the way the relationship progresses very much points to that. And I just really loved all of it. It was like such a cozy hug while also being ridiculously funny and quite gross at some points. Like, I don't mind tentacles. If you do mind tentacles, maybe this is not the one for you. But like, it is, I really enjoyed this book. It was so nice, and I need you to read it. Next, we have Evocation by ST Gibson. This is also a fantasy that has quite a prominent romance plot to this. This is also the first book in a series. Jess from the channel Fit for Gaming just told me this morning in a comment that this is supposed to be a quartet, which I did not know. I read this as a standalone, but it appears to have more development in the future. And I think the next book is set to come out in 2025. And in this book, we have three kind of main characters. We have like our main character. Unfortunately, I do not remember names. Usually that's the case for me. But our like main character is like this rich boy, man, whatever, and he is like very career oriented, and he is part of this like magical society thing, and he really hopes that he will be the next like president of this organization or whatever. So he's like really working very hard. He's very charming, and yeah, this is like our main character. And then we have a couple, a husband and a wife. The husband is the ex of that first character. He's also part of that magical association, society, whatever thing. And he strives to get the same position. So they're now kind of in this like enemy situation because they're both bitter that they've broken up. And then also they are striving to get the same position in this society thing. And the wife is not part of the society. She has a different kind of magic, and yeah, it's just like, it's about their relationships and their characters mostly. But then we also have this plot that there is like some kind of like a weird demon thing that is threatening our first character, and so he has to go to these other two characters and ask for their help because he can't figure out what's going on and how to get rid of this demon thing. I really enjoyed this. Like, it wasn't my favorite book of all time, but I had a good time reading it. I think that these characters were quite intriguing, especially the female part of this like little triad. I think her name was Moira. I loved her. I loved the way that she managed to be very open and talk openly about what she wants in a relationship, and she was really like keeping those two boys in check. And yeah, I'm intrigued to see more of this, but for a first book, I think this stood very well on its own. Then we have a sequel that I did not expect, and that is Somewhere Beyond the Sea by T.J. Klune. This is a sequel to The House in the Cerulean Sea. Now, I loved that first book. It is also cozy fantasy, so it was just like a big hug and what I needed back when it came out. So I was interested to see how this story would continue in this one. In this one, we follow the kind of other love interest character from the first book a little bit more. So in this one, we focus on Arthur instead of Linus. This is a male-male romance kind of situation, and we have these two characters that are now taking care of a home for magical children, and so we get most of the characters from the first book that we fell in love with. However, the second book just didn't really work for me. I think what it tried to do was just way too much, and it just really couldn't deliver what it was promising, kind of. And also, I expected this to be very cozy. I read this in November when we learned about, you know, the direction our world is going in for the next couple of years, which like hit me very, very hard. And so I picked up this book to kind of help me get through this. And the thing is that you start off with a situation where our characters get like discriminated against so hard and like gaslit and everything, and it was just horrible to read. And so yeah, in the end, I think this book tried to do something and say something, but also the way it was resolved in the end, it just was not satisfying to me. So I still gave it 4 stars because I just, you know, the nostalgia of the first book kind of carried this in a way, and there were some very beautiful scenes, but I really don't think I needed the sequel, to be honest. And the last book I wanted to talk about for the fantasy section is A Sorceress Comes to Call by T. Kingfisher. I am a huge T. Kingfisher fan. She's one of my favorite authors, so I was very excited to check out her new book. This one is a Goose Girl retelling where we follow 2 main characters. We have a young girl whose mother is a sorceress, and we have an older woman, and her brother is kind of the man that the sorceress is trying to marry. So both of our characters don't really want this to happen, and they're trying to stop it from happening while being kind of like overwhelmed by the magical powers of the sorceress. I had a great time with this. The way that T. Kingfisher writes, her characters, her humor, it just works really well for me. These books usually do get quite dark, even though they feel like lighter because of the tone they're written in, and that is just a combination that I adore. So this book definitely was right up my alley, and I very much enjoyed it. Okay, the next categories will all be a little bit shorter. We're starting out with the fantasy romance and paranormal romance and romantasy and whatever that stuff is called. I am not an expert on this genre. I usually don't read books in this genre, so I was even surprised that this is a separate category this year, but we have 2 books to talk about. The first one I liked, and that is Bride by Ali Hazelwood. Now, this one I think is more for beginners, especially for reading kind of Omegaverse books, because this is like kind of like an entry point, I guess, and if you enjoy it, then you can go into the like real Omegaverse. That is what I gathered from it. Not that I, as I said, have any experience with any of that. I'm not a romance reader. It's just not my thing. So yeah, I really enjoyed Bride. I had a fun time with it. It is about a vampire woman who has lived apart from her peers for a long time because she had to live with humans for kind of like a political alliance that her father created. And now that she could go back, she doesn't really feel like she fits in with her fellow vampires anymore. And then her father decides that for a new alliance, she is supposed to marry and werewolf alpha. And so we have their kind of relationship. So they marry even though they don't really know each other, and then we watch their relationship develop and them also uncovering some like fantasy plot thingies. So this is more like paranormal romance. We do have a world that feels very much like our own, except for there's vampires and werewolves. And I liked it. I think that I enjoyed the plot quite a bit because like the romance, I don't know, I don't have like strong feelings about romances usually, so I still need a good plot to keep me excited, and this book definitely did that. I felt like we had enough like mystery stuff going on that I was engaged, and I remember like getting to the end of all of these mystery things, and I was like, great, it's all resolved, now the book is over. And then I realized, oh no, this is also a romance, so now we still have to get through the romancy things at the end. So yeah, I read this for the plot more than the romance, and I had a fun time with it. Now for the next book, I cannot say the same. This is my worst book I read last year, and that was When the Moon Hatched by Sarah A. Parker, something like that. I will not continue on with this series. This was just terrible to me. This is exactly the kind of like romantasy books that I dislike, and that's why I don't try more in this genre. But this was available through my library. A lot of my friends hyped it up, so I gave it a try and I regretted it a lot. This one follows an assassin woman, and she doesn't really remember her past, but because of some things that happen, she has to go on a revenge quest. And while she's doing that, she meets this king of another like part of the world, and they seem to have some kind of like chemistry and history, and so their paths kind of intertwine. But this book for me personally did everything wrong. I hated the main character. She was so oblivious, and all of her decisions made no sense to me at all. I was also really upset that what happens at the beginning of the book that sets her on this revenge path, it was created so badly that I did not care about it at all, because I wasn't really shown the like thing that got destroyed that she wants revenge for. So I didn't care at all. Then there's like very nonsensical things thrown in there. Like just like a magical being that's like, oh, this is such a mythological being that everyone talks about, and I never thought it would be real. And it's just like, it shows up, it does something you don't understand, but it helps the main character in some way, and then it disappears again. And it just made no sense. It made no sense at all. And then the love interest was like the only person I kind of liked, I guess, because he's trying to be like very understanding of her nonsensical decisions. And I really hope he finds someone else to be with, because he deserves better. And then there is this like mystery going on, which is very obvious. Like if you read the book, it is super obvious who the main character is and what she doesn't remember. It is so obvious that I thought that at least by the end of the book, we should get that as a twist. And then there happens something as the twist. And you're like, yeah, I knew that. Like reading all of those like 700 pages or however ridiculously long this book is. Like, I knew that. And then the book ends. And you don't get anything. You don't get anything you can't see from page 3 already. So yeah, sorry. End of the rant. I just... so sad. Okay, next we go into the horror category. I have 3 books for that. 2 I really liked and 1 disappointment. The first book was What Feasts at Night by T. Kingfisher. Again, I told you she's one of my favorite authors, so obviously I want to check out her stuff. This is a horror novella that is the second in a little series. In this one, we follow a ex-soldier who uses kind of non-binary pronouns that are like specific to this book. I think it is Khan Khan, if I remember correctly. And we follow Alex the soldier who goes on adventures with like creepy things. This second book focuses on like dream stuff, which I really love, like dreams and nightmares and magic surrounding that. I just love that. It's just something I eat up. So the second one actually worked even better for me than the first book. Then we have The Blonde Dies First by Joelle Wellington. This is the second book I've read from this author, and I think also the second book they put out. This is a YA horror. I would describe this more as a slasher. We have a group of teenagers that is kind of diverse. And at the center of this group, we have a pair of twins, and one of these twins goes to a fancy white school. So at the beginning of the book, all of our friend group goes to a party of those white, like privileged kids, and they start doing kind of like a Ouija board situation. And after that, a monster seems to be hunting down our friend group. And I had a great time with this. I'm not like the biggest fan of slashers, but I think this one worked quite well because it had a lot of like social commentary as well, while being a very fun horror slasher. I really enjoyed the journey of our main character because she feels kind of left behind by her twin sister, and throughout the book they also kind of have to figure out their relationship, and that it might be very unfair to put the blame only on the sister who goes to this fancy school because she's so good in like school and stuff like that. So I had a good time with it. I would still say that I liked the first book by this author a little bit more, just because it wasn't a slasher, it was more like a horror thriller situation, so it worked for my taste a little bit better, but I definitely have my eyes wide open to see what Joelle Wellington writes next. And then the last horror book would be Horror Movie by Paul Tremblay. Unfortunately, this one did not work for me. This had this very weird plot about a very pretentious horror movie that a group of kids tried to do, but it failed terribly. Something went terribly wrong. But throughout the years, there has been kind of like a cult following of this movie that never existed. And so now we are many, many years later, and we're following the man who played kind of the murderer monster situation in the original film, as there are plans to redo the film and like actually bring it into cinemas. And it was pretentious, it went nowhere, it wasn't scary. I think the best thing I could say about this book is that the audiobook has sound effects, which in some instances made it a little bit more scary. But for me personally, I never understood what the characters were trying to do here, and so it just never made sense. And this also has more of this slasher vibe to it, but it tries to be intellectual with a slasher, and that did not work for me at all. Okay, next up we have two thrillers I wanted to mention. The first one is Where Sleeping Girls Lie by Faridah Àbíké-Íyímídé. Now, I absolutely loved the first book by this author. And so again, for this one, I think I just had like unattainable expectations, and this book did not quite hit those, which makes it a bit of a disappointment, but it was still a really, really good book. And this one, we follow a girl who has not been in a school. She has been taught at home for a while, but now she decides to go to a private school. And when she gets there, she has a roommate assigned to her, and in the first night, her roommate disappears, and so our main character is trying to figure out what happened to her roommate. This is a very Me Too book, and because of that, for me, it felt like a little bit late, kind of, because I feel like a lot of these discussions we have had. At the same time, maybe it is never like too late to bring these topics into YA thrillers and to kind of get new readers to think about these topics. So maybe that was just something that wasn't quite right for me personally, but it's not a fault of the book. I wanted this to be even more. I felt like we have a lot of things that the main character doesn't tell us until like very late in the book. There is some things that we can kind of guess from weird like flashbacky things, but all in all, I really thought that if we had known some of these things, we could have felt the stakes of the story so much more. And I was kind of like sad that the structure of the story was done in this way, because I think we could have discussed the topics and explored the feelings of the main character so much more if this wouldn't have been like the twist at the end, but something that we knew going into the book. And then the kind of thrilling element of the book could have been to see whether she exceeds and how much she has to pay for the kind of revenge that she's looking for. And then we have Home is Where the Bodies Are by Jeneva Rose. This is an adult thriller. We have 3 characters whose mother passes away at the beginning of the book. And so these 3 characters come together in their childhood home and they kind of start going through the things to get the house ready to be sold. And they find this videotape of their parents because their mom usually filmed a lot when they were children. And at the end of the tape, there is a clip they have never seen that kind of implies that their parents had something to do with a missing persons case from like decades ago. And so they're kind of trying to figure out what to do with that. And I had a lot of fun with this one. I didn't go in with the highest expectations, to be honest. I read this for a little vlog project and I didn't really know what to expect from this book. And so it had a lot of room to surprise me and make me like excited to read it. There was like one thing that like very early on I was like, oh, if this is the twist, I'm gonna like this book a lot. And it ended up being the case. So I had a lot of fun with this. I think this explores how much like one man's mistakes can ruin the lives of so many women in a very interesting way. And I had a good time with this. Last but not least, I'm going to keep this one very, very short because I've been babbling on for way too long. We have 4 holiday books that I read. Now, right now is probably not the time you want to read holiday books, but I have read The Merriest Misters, which is a Christmas kind of like rom-com situation. We follow a gay married couple as they attack Santa because they think he's a burglar. And to save Christmas, they have to step in and become Santa themselves. This one was fun, but it dealt with the relationship problems and the personal problems of these characters way more than I anticipated. And so I wanted this to be even more silly funny than it actually ended up being. Then we have Love You Alatka, which is a Hanukkah romance. I really enjoyed this one quite a bit. This was definitely my favorite holiday book that I read that came out last year. This one follows a grumpy coffee shop owner who has to organize a Hanukkah festival to kind of keep her coffee shop and the town afloat, and she needs the help of her like very sunshiny, most hated customer. And it's just really cute. They go to New York together. It explores a lot about family and yeah, just the way that sometimes family just isn't very good for you and how that can impact your life. And it was lovely. Then we have The Christmas Cottage, which is a Christmas family drama thing. I don't even know what to classify this as. There is a tidbit of a romance in there, but mainly this focuses just a really, really fucked up family situation. This is described as like escapist and cozy, and honestly, for me, it was none of those things. It was very hard to read about these things for me. I think if you find this cozy and escapist, then you just haven't had a very challenging childhood because if you have, then this is not cozy. This is re-traumatizing, and that is what it did to me. Now obviously I did not like experience exactly the same things that happened to the characters here, but something similar, not to like this extreme extent that it makes sense for a story like that, but like something similar happened to me, and I just really did not like being reminded of that. And last but not least, we have Acid Christmas. Now, this originally already came out in 2023, but the audiobook released in 2024, so I'm throwing it in here as well. This is just the wildest book I've ever read. I have no idea what this is really about, and I did not give this like a high rating just because I have no idea what I've read, but I also didn't hate the experience. So basically, this is kind of like a disaster book. We have something very terrible happening at the Toronto airport, and a lot of our characters get stuck there. We have 2 main characters that we follow. One is a flight attendant and one is a journalist, and yeah, they're just stuck there, and they find some drugs and they find some men, and you know, they're just stuck. And in that regard, it kind of reflected the pandemic times in a very weird way. This also is set kind of like in a post-pandemic situation, and there is also a new strain of the pandemic going on. So yeah, it just really had this like claustrophobic feeling of like just being kind of stuck in like one place. And obviously during the pandemic, I had the luxury to just be stuck in my home, but like being stuck at an airport is like so much worse. And so yeah, this was just wild. Okay, I feel like this video is way too long and I'm so sorry for that. I can't talk about books for a very long time, but I hope you found something that maybe you're interested in, maybe you hadn't considered reading yet. Some of these books were definitely new favorites. Some of these were really great, and a few of these I wish I would have not read. So I hope you can gain some interesting information from this. And let me know if there's any books that you want to check out now after seeing this video. I would love to hear about that. Have a great day. Leave a like. That always helps me out. And I'll talk to you soon. Bye.